welcome everybody to the October Council meeting. As always, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, who continue to play a very important part in our town in the present as well as in our history. As you know, local government elections are this weekend, so this is the final meeting for Council's current iteration. And for Councillor Mikitchuk and Councillor Brown, they will both be resigning from Council, so I'll give them both an opportunity to speak a little bit later in the meeting. Also just want to bring everyone's attention to the fact that our meetings are recorded and live streamed, so that people who are unable to attend can still access Council business, just in an effort to keep our community involved and engaged in what's going on in their local area. We have no presentations this evening. Item 3, attendance, apologies and applications for leave. So Councillor Quinton is an apology this evening. And I'd just like to acknowledge Mona Solomon. It's her final council meeting as acting director this evening. So Mona, thank you very much. You've done a fabulous job during a difficult period to step into. So thank you for all your efforts. It's greatly appreciated. Item 4 is public question time. So is there anybody who would like to ask questions this evening? No? Okay, any addresses by members of the public? Mr. Yates.
Just a short one if I may. Thank you. Don Yates, 10 Thompson Road, Success Hill. Actually just a thank you to Bill Busby, who isn't here this evening. I have a water fountain outside my little white picket fence, which I know Councillor Gangel's used once or twice. Last count, it's now been used 70,000 times in the last 10 odd years. Still going strong, still appreciated by the passing. And I just wanted to formally thank Bill Busby from Pride Plumbing, because one time we lost a bit of hose for a bong and he came along and volunteered and actually fixed it up for us. So thank you, Bill Busby.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to deputations. We've got Ian and Kerry from the Church of Christ who are here this evening. Would you like to come forward to the council table? Yes, please do. So they're presenting on item 10.3, which is the application for sponsorship for the Christmas Carols event. Yeah. So welcome.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to speak to council a little about your event, and if there's any questions that councillors have, then at the end of, that'd be fabulous. Thank you.
Okay, well thank you very much for the opportunity to share. And I was just thinking before I spoke, I've been in the Bassendean area for about 35 years, so fair time, and 11 years across the river in Guildford, so 46 years. And I was actually involved in the first carols we did at Success Hill Reserve. That was in 1990. So this year is our 30th anniversary of running the carols. I know things have changed. Initially, when we first started, we ran in conjunction with the Bassendean Town Council, so we did the event together. And now here we are. So we're looking at doing our 30th anniversary carols. It's been, I think, probably up to 2015 at Success Hill, but Success Hill became too small for us. The SES who are involved, they felt that that we probably should look somewhere else because of parking and all those sort of things. And then with Salvatore, part of the Shire, he suggested we go to the Bassendean, what do you call it? Bassendean Steel Blue Oval, that's it. So that's where we've been since 2016. If you were involved in the carols in 2017, it was that was a storm event. So we had to go to Cyril Jackson Rec Centre, and in 2018, last year, we were back at the Oval. Yeah, So carols is a fantastic time where we have a few thousand people come. We've been blessed to have from the very beginning, the Combined Districts Concert Band, about a 40 to 45 piece brass band. So they build out the carols and we get to sing them. We have the schools involved. At the moment we have Anzac Terrace Primary School and Eden Hill Primary School. Bassendean and Eden Hill Primary Schools that sing for the carols. And the carols has got a combination of choirs. We've got our own church choir and also some jazz, and often we have a soloist just singing out the carols, from the Australian Jingle Bell to Oh Holy Night. So that's the setting. We've also tried to make the carols in the last few years a bit bigger in terms of having food vans, family sort of setting on the beautiful green grass, having games sort of just informally played on the beautiful oval before we get together and sing. Yeah.
Fabulous. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for coming along tonight, and thank you for the contribution that you make to our community and with your congregation to bring people together and sing at a fun time of year. In the officer recommendation at point 3, I take it you've had a chance to see the officer report at all?
No, I haven't. No?
That's all right. So I'll just take it with you. So it says here at point 3 that the event be opened with a welcome to country acknowledgement. Is that part of your standard practice? Is that something that you have access to? Do you have people who would be able to come and do a welcome to country at the start of the event?
We haven't had welcome to country before, but we have had Aboriginal people actually participate. So my associate pastor, Rod, is an Aboriginal pastor, and we have access to doing those things. Like I'm involved in Governor's Prayer Breakfast, and we have a welcome to country. We've had, but we haven't always had Noongar Aboriginals. So we've had people from east of Kalgoorlie coming as well, the Brownlee family.
Yes.
Yeah. That's because we love Aboriginal people. So
and the Brownlee family singers, of course,
yes,
are very famous.
Marcia.
Yes.
You know them, right? There you go.
I do. Lyndon, who is also now councillor at Kalgoorlie. So with a welcome to country here in Bassendean, then it would be appropriate to find someone with a Noongar connection to the Whadjuk people. So is that something that you would be able to resource, or is that something you might need some assistance with?
We sure can. If we have to in trouble, I don't think we would. We can ask council. Yeah.
I think from memory the Brownlees also have connection through Noongar country as well. So.
They do. There's a lot of connecting.
Right.
There's this mob and that mob. Yeah.
Anybody else have questions? Well, thank you. And it's an enormous commitment. 30 years of delivering this event to our community is really amazing. So thank you for doing that so consistently. I know that a lot of people attend every year and really love the event. So thanks for all your efforts, not just on that night, but I'm sure all throughout the year as well. We really appreciate it. In that case, we'll come to your agenda item soon, and then council will make the decision on the application. So thank you very much for coming along tonight and sharing with us. We really appreciate it.
And thank you for the opportunity we've had as well. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, we'll move on to item 5, which is the confirmation of the minutes. Councillor Gangel's moving 5.1A. We have a seconder, Councillor Brown. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 5.1B, that they're a true record. Councillor Gangel moved, seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 5.2 is the ordinary council meeting in September, so 5.2A, that the minutes be received. Councillor Gangel moved, seconded Councillor Brown. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 5.2B, that they're a true record, moved by Councillor Gangel, Councillor Brown. This is becoming a bit repetitive. All those in favour? And that is carried unanimously. Item 6 is announcements. Just hold on 2 seconds. So, as I said at the beginning, this is the final meeting for this current council, and I'm sure everyone sitting around this table would agree that 2 years has flown by very quickly since this current council has been inducted. And it's been a relatively challenging period with lots of changes happening behind the scenes, but I'm really proud of the way that this group has worked together to be really positive and cohesive and putting differences aside. So thank you everybody for being part of that. And I think there's lots of good things that are in motion. But I wanted to speak to Bob and Mel for their contribution over the last 4 and 2 years to start with. So Bob, my first memory of Bob is seeing an enormous election sign of his face being driven around the town centre on the back of a scooter. And I thought, I don't think I'm going to like this guy. But I was wrong. I do quite like Bob, and I'm really grateful that when Bob and I were both newbies on council 4 years ago, that we got our seats allocated next to each other, and we were able to support each other through that very steep learning curve when you first get on council. I'm really grateful to have shared that experience with you, Bob. And as the Deputy Mayor over the last 2 years, you've been incredibly loyal, and I know that whenever I've asked for some support, you would be there as long as there were party pies involved. So, very important point when it comes to Bob. And I hope that when the next group of councillors come through, there'll be somebody to help take your place and represent the meat eaters in our community amongst this group of vegetarian councillors. So I think you'd all know that Bob is a man who loves his family and loves our town and our community. So thank you, Bob, for everything you've contributed over the last couple of years. You've been a consistent advocate for our community as a whole, but particularly for Ashfield, for our river, for our community being safe and connected. So thank you for the ways that you've contributed like that. Also, thank you to your family, to your wife and your 2 kids for giving up time with them over the last 4 years so that you can be part of this council and serve your community. So on behalf of council and our community, I just want to thank you for everything you've contributed, and we will miss you, and please come and give us a hard time from the gallery over the next few years. So if you would like to speak, I'll hand over to you. And then
Thank you. Renee asked me if I'd like to say something when I came in this evening. I hadn't prepared anything, but yeah, it has been a very interesting and enlightening 4 years, and I lead council at a time when it's been led by 2 tremendous people and an executive team that is moulded around that. I'd also like to pay my respects to the previous executives and of the town of Bassendean too. They had their own way of doing things, but it is time for change. So I'd like to pay respects to them as well. As you know, my circumstances have changed, and I will go on and do some other things that I have a great passion for and try and create a legacy there. Increasingly over the last 12 months it's taken more and more of my time, and most of you have understood that, I think, and made allowances for me. I think the greatest challenge facing this council will be the way it deals with social media. In the last few weeks I've seen, I want to preface this by saying we should take our flora very seriously and the destruction of it, and we should avoid destroying that at all costs, all reasonable costs. But I saw a group of people masquerading as the majority and were about to change the decision and ultimately the future direction of council, had that been permitted to happen. That's my belief. We're not the only council dealing with it. That will be the greatest challenge, one of the greatest challenges facing this council. All other things will fall in place with our 2 leaders. We do have, I have the greatest respect and affection, actually, for my councillors. They're a terrific mob. John Gangel, your contribution to the town over more than a decade, I'd like to acknowledge that. I'm so glad that you are running again and will stay on. That kind of experience is hard won, and you'll be very important to the town going forward. So thank you for that. But as I said, I have a great affection for all of you. We do think about things differently, and probably because of that, my effectiveness on council is less than it was previously, because we do think about things differently, and that's got to be acknowledged. And I said there was one particular decision that was made last year that led me to think that. I won't go into detail, but I told Renee at the conclusion of that my presence on council would be less effective towards good decision making. Renee knows it, I know it, won't go into detail, but like I said, that's not the reason I'm leaving. My circumstances have changed, and I won't be heckling from the backbenches, but I'll be keeping an eye, and I'll be logging in probably, and I'll be here for the swearing. The next day, I'm riding on a charity ride to Newman with 19 colleagues for Police Legacy and to commemorate the death of 4 police officers who crashed in an aircraft in 2001. So I'll be coming to that, and then I'm off for 6 days. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We will miss you, Bob, and we hope you strike gold in the future.
Already struck, man.
Melissa, so 2 years ago Melissa was elected with a record number of votes, and I think that shows clearly that the people of Bassendean felt a real affinity with Melissa and the values that she embodied, and having had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with you over the last couple of years, and not only as a councillor but become friends, I can understand why the people of Bassendean got right behind you during the election. You have brought with you a wealth of life experience from all the different roles, varied roles that you've played in your life, and I think that's really added a lot to this council. You clearly have a love of Bassendean and the people here, and I think all the decisions that you've made have reflected putting the people of Bassendean first, which I really admire. You are consistently a voice of reason, that you are caring and you are considered in your approach, and I think that's really important and something that's contributed enormously to this council. You've done a great job chairing the River Parks Committee, and your passion for our natural environment and our river and the natural area around the river has really benefited from that, and I think you've built some fantastic relationships, particularly with the state government departments, that will allow that work to continue even after you've left council. And also your passion for mental health and people in our community being, their well-being is really valued. You've also done some fabulous work alongside Councillor Wilson with the EMRC, and I think there's been some fantastic progress made there that will also carry forward, particularly around waste and recycling, so thank you for that. And I think your resignation partway through your term is the right decision for you, but it's a huge loss for our community, but I support you fully in your decision. I think you've done a fantastic job of juggling so many different roles over the last year, and I hope that now you can find a path that is really clear ahead for you, and that we'll continue to see you contributing in the community in a different role. So thank you for everything you've done, and if you would like the opportunity to speak too, we would love to give you that opportunity.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Well, firstly, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have served on council. I am really proud of the difference that we have made together, and it is a good time to reflect on why I put my hand up for this role. And I did that for lots of reasons, but the main reasons were I believe our environment is really important, and I wanted to see that protected. And I wanted to see that protected in the context of good planning and good development that meant that we could also have a natural environment, but we could do that in a considered way. They were two of the really big things. I think mental health and having a connected community were really important as well. And I think one of the reasons I can step down is because I'm very confident that we are achieving those things, and actually some of our biggest achievements are yet to be seen, because I think a lot of work has been put into good strategy, good policy and good governance. So I think the legacy of this council and the positive impacts are going to be incredibly far-reaching into the future. And yeah, I feel really confident about that, and I think that's really important, because it's not just about councillors, it's about councillors and the community and an effective administration all working together. And that brings me to Peter's appointment and the tremendous changes that have been made over the last 12 months, and the work that's been done in that space, which again, the positive impacts of that will be far-reaching into the future. And also, under Renee's leadership, that has really strengthened our effectiveness, everything we have achieved and gone on to achieve. And I feel really lucky to have worked with such a great bunch of people, because you know what, I spent more time with you guys than pretty much anyone, and we had a lot of fun and we made a positive impact, and I consider you my friends, and I know that our interactions won't be limited to, you know, me sitting around this table. So I think that's fantastic. I thank everyone in the community for their support, especially my family and friends who I could not have done this without. As you know, it's a huge workload. Nearly all of us work full time, and it's like a second job on top of that. So, you know, we couldn't do that without the support of people we care about. So, yeah, thanks everyone. I look forward to seeing you in the streets of Bassendean, down the river, and all the other places under festoon lighting. So,
Oh, the festoon lighting. Thank you, Bob and Mel. We will really miss you. So on that note, obviously there's the election this weekend, and I'd just like to remind everybody who is listening at home, hopefully, to vote. As of this morning, I think there were about 20% of ballot papers returned because our ballot papers were very late being sent out. So everybody that cares about the community needs to get their vote in. They can hand deliver it to 35 Old Perth Road up until Saturday at 6 p.m. But I'd encourage everyone to do so. Final announcement, Councillor Wilson's birthday today. Happy birthday.
Well done.
It's enough of that love-in stuff. Item 7 is petitions, which I don't think we have any. 8 is declarations of interest. Is there anything that councillors wish to declare? No business deferred from the previous meeting. So we're going to item 10.1, which is the en bloc adoption. So at the moment I have the following coming out of en bloc. I have item 10.2, 10.3, 10.4, 10.5, 10.6, 13.1 and 13.2. Is there anything else that councillors would like taken out? No. In that case, I have a mover to carry the remainder en bloc. Councillor Gangel moved, seconded Councillor Hamilton. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. We might do item 10.3 first, which is the community benefit sponsorship for the Carols by Candlelight. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to move the officer recommendation with an amendment. So the purpose of the amendment is to provide some assistance to the organisers of the event to facilitate the Welcome to Country acknowledgement. I think that if we're seeking to put an obligation or a requirement on the community group to hold one, there will be costs involved, and I think it's would be useful if we contributed towards those costs. So the wording that I'm proposing is to add a new point 4. The council approves an additional, or council approves up to an additional $500 towards the cost of the Welcome to Country. And then on a related matter, an additional 5th point, which would be that council requests staff to prepare a report to council about providing Welcome to Country information to all applicants for event funding in the future.
So the report would be to prepare some materials, do you mean?
Sorry, I'm not sure that's actually separate to this item because it doesn't actually directly relate to this item. So that should be put out either as a notice of motion separately, but not attached as a point to this recommendation because it doesn't actually relate to the item itself.
Do you want to read that back? Sorry.
My understanding is that we do it. This.
Sorry.
We may actually do that presently. And I might just ask the acting director to make a comment on that.
We do encourage organisations when they do put forward their events to actually make sure that they do have a welcome to country. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification. In the light of the officer information and Councillor Gangel's contribution, I'm happy to remove the proposed additional 5th point and to move the officer recommendation with the additional fourth point, approving up to an additional.
A question or seconding? Councillor Gantel, seconding? Do you have a question?
I was going to second, but I was going to ask the mover if he would be willing to accept an additional dot point.
I'm open to considering an additional dot point.
Okay. I think it would be dot point 5 in that case, would it not be?
No,
okay. That all promotional material produced by Bassendean Church of Christ acknowledge the town's sponsorship.
Yes, so I'm happy to accept that.
Amendment? Councillor Gantel was the seconder. Are you happy?
No, I believe that happens in any case.
Right, so that's yes. So we've got a mover and a seconder. Is there anybody against? All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 10.2 we'll go back to, which is the JDAP application. Are there questions for the staff on this item? And actually, Mr. Reid, is there anything you wanted to speak to first, since this wasn't at the briefing session? No. Questions? Councillor Wilson first, and then I think Councillor Hamilton might be second.
Thank you, Your Worship. At a previous meeting, Council considered a different application for the same lot of land, which was subject to proceedings at the JDAP, and resulted in that application being rejected by the JDAP. I was just wondering if staff were able to explain the differences between the application that was rejected by JDAP and this one, and how that relates to the officer recommendation to endorse this particular application.
The previous proposal to renew the approval, there'd been a change in the planning framework in as much as the design apartments codes were introduced into the code, so it no longer met that framework. So that's the reason that was refused. This report is looking at the existing statutory framework.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just as a supplemental question, so just confirming then, is it the staff's opinion that regardless of views that Council might have as to the appropriateness of the development, that it is likely to survive a JDAP application or a subsequent SAT appeal?
I think my officer recommendation, it's likely that some of the conditions may be challenged by the applicant when it gets to it, to the JDAP meeting, but it's my opinion that the recommendation would be supported.
Councillor Hamilton?
Okay. I note in the report that the zoning for the land is R20, R40, and it's a discretion. The usage for church is discretionary. Is that correct?
Childcare centre?
A childcare centre is discretionary use within the residential zone.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you had another question. Yes, Councillor Gantel, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in relation to this, I have seen emails back and forth in relation to this matter, and one of the emails raised the issue with the current planning situation, and I think in one of the emails it mentioned the delay in the town planning scheme review. Just given that, with the current zoning as the like, I'm just wondering, perhaps the CEO might be better placed, because I'm not understanding, because we were in a position probably 18 months ago where we were going to go out with 3 potential plans. That was put on hold. We then subsequently did the community builder block workshops. Just wondering, what is the time frame, obviously when we've got issues like this, and our zoning obviously being delayed, when are we looking at actually having planning review scheme in place, ready to actually be reviewed and the community comment and implemented?
Certainly. So that was my second day when the density scenarios were presented to council, and essentially 2 alternate density scenarios were going to be presented. My concern, and having discussed the matter with the Mayor, was that there was not a lot of context around those density scenarios, and quite a polarising, options to put to the community without any context. So the WAPC is very keen to understand the strategic aspirations of the community prior to talking density. So what we did embark upon, and I brought back to council, was a community engagement strategy, and that was endorsed in December. We went to tender and engaged Creating Communities earlier this year. They've just completed a 6-month engagement project, which will come to council next month. Prior to that, there'll be a presentation at a concept workshop. That very clearly outlines the strategic aspirations of this community, which will inform a new local planning strategy and scheme. Local planning strategy and schemes generally take 2 to 3 years to develop. As you would be aware, an officer has been working on LPS and scheme for some time. The progress hasn't been significant. We have a new Director Community Planning commencing on Monday, and his first task will be to review exactly where that officer got the project to and what the gap analysis is to deliver an LPS and a new scheme.
So I'm just trying to, because in relation to this, the problems come up obviously directly in relation to this is the land usage allowance. So are you saying we're still another 2 to 3 years away from having an implemented scheme?
The scheme does take longer. Talking to the Planning Commissioner, he's very keen to understand what the strategic intent is of the town, and that's a discussion I think we could probably have in the next couple of months with the Bassendean report endorsed by council, but also new Director Community Planning on board. So to present to the WAPC what the future direction looks like, they're keen, WAPC is keen to provide advice back to the town early and maintain a more of an iterative approach rather than delivering a fully cooked strategy and scheme. So present our ideas, gain some feedback, go back with a draft strategy, so maintain an iterative relationship during its preparation.
So then my final question then is, how then is that keeping up with the town's requirements with infill and the like, if we're still potentially, I mean what you're saying is 2 to 3 to 5 or beyond years away, how are we going to actually fulfil our requirements? Obviously we've got situations like this where a key parcel of land is developed as not even a dwelling, it's developed as a different use, an alternative use, obviously in this case of childcare. How do we then meet our requirements for the infill targets?
Yeah. So I guess some local governments have been caught in a situation where they've tried to rush the development of a local planning strategy and scheme and presented both to WAPC, to find both being rejected and having to go back to square one. We're trying to provide some guarantees of that not happening. That I think would be a terrible situation to be in, not only for the town but also I guess for the community as well. So the idea is that we do this preparatory work, but that will then allow us to develop the strategy and scheme fairly quickly.
Okay, thank you.
That's Hamilton.
I understand that many councils have the ability to do site-specific amendments to their schemes, and I noticed that City of Bayswater recently did one last month, which was specific to a site, to rezone, to allow a particular type of development to go ahead. So my curiosity is piked here about why we can't do site-specific amendments to enable a quicker solution. I also know that given how old our town planning scheme is that we've only had 11 such amendments in as many years. And I believe that many councils do multiple amendments, site-specific amendments to their town planning scheme. So can I understand why this is not happening in our particular council?
I suppose the planners come with the position that we should not be supporting spot rezonings at this stage, that it should be dressed up or addressed through the local planning strategy and scheme. So I suppose that's the reason that generally we do not support spot rezonings. And having said that, it would be a council decision rather than an officer decision if somebody asked for a rezoning. If you think of the context of this site, it still seems to me there's too much uncertainty in terms of what the future build form outcomes are likely to be for that site. The existing adopted local planning strategy talks about density codes of R60 or R80 or whatever it is. The process we are going through with Bassendean Future is trying to identify what's valued by the community, and I think to introduce a scheme amendment, it would be beyond density code, and this council has previously indicated a desire for design guidelines and things to control the build form, and I would say the council or the town is not ready to go forward with that.
Councillor Hamilton?
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong, but recently the state government introduced design guidelines for apartments. So that has been a recent amendment which would effectively produce better design outcomes for apartments. So is that correct?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Can I just suppose where I was coming from? It was my understanding that council would potentially be looking for its own design guidelines beyond the neighbourhood codes, but I may be incorrect in that assumption.
Okay. So continuing on, obviously Perth Peel has a focus on higher density closer to the train stations. That seems to have been a theme coming through now to every possible workshop that I've been to for the last couple of years. So given that Perth Peel is more or less emphasising higher density closer to the train stations, given the location of this site right opposite the Bassendean train station and the size of the site, and also given the fact that recent design guidelines have been approved for apartments via the state government, can I ask what impediments there might be for this council to do a site-specific spot rezoning for that site in advance of any Bassendean or future major amendment to the plan?
Just wonder if it's worth noting the particular owners of this site were approached with an opportunity to potentially engage with Department of Communities to look at a mixed-use site, so development with housing. And whilst it was something that they expressed some interest in, their concern was the timelines, and there is a desire to get something built ASAP on the site. So whilst they're open to looking at that in the future, they want to see something happen within a shorter time frame.
Okay.
If council were to initiate a scheme amendment, which it could not do tomorrow, it would take a month or two to prepare the scheme amendment documents.
Excuse me, gentlemen, can I hear?
If council were to initiate a scheme amendment, it would probably take a month or two to initiate the scheme amendment documents and to get them adopted, and probably something like 6 to 10 months to get it approved. I know council is concerned about the perceived underdevelopment of this site. But if council was taking that approach, we are dealing with spot fires wherever there's a development proposal. And to me, the planning should be more strategic and comprehensive than looking at individual sites.
So, thanks for answering all the questions that I sent through since we got the agenda. Can you just help me to understand? I asked the question about the comment made in the report about the location of a childcare centre next to a liquor store, and I wasn't completely clear on what your response meant. So in here it says, if there was an intention to locate a liquor store next to an established childcare centre, this may prove problematic through the former Department of Racing, Gaming and Liquor. Can you help me to understand what you're saying exactly?
The Department of Racing and Gaming and Liquor, or liquor licensing, would get involved in terms of the location of a new bottle shop. They would have, I suppose, no mandate to get involved in locating a childcare centre next door to a liquor store.
But you're saying if it was vice versa, there was already a childcare centre there.
It may. I'm not saying it would.
Yeah.
It may prove problematic.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, councillors, so we've got the Oxford recommendation. You would also have had an alternative that I circulated earlier. I would like to move the alternate motion. If there's Councillor Hamilton is seconding that. Does anybody? I'll read that out for the benefit of others. So the alternative is that Council advises the Metro Central Joint Development Assessment Panel that Council does not support the officer's recommendation in the Responsible Authority report to the panel, and the application for the proposed childcare premises for Lot 54, Number 72 Railway Parade, Bassendean should be refused on the grounds, 1, that it represents an underdevelopment of the land and does not align with Council's and the State Government's future intent and desire for more intensive mixed-use development in this location due to its close proximity to the Bassendean train station, and 2, the proposed childcare centre fails to meet all of the objectives of Planning Bulletin 72 of 2009, childcare centres, and is therefore inconsistent with the principles of orderly and proper planning, given the childcare centre is proposed to be located next to an approved liquor store at 76 Railway Parade, Bassendean. Council considers that a liquor store and childcare premises are incompatible land uses and would be inappropriate to locate a childcare premise next to an existing liquor store. So I've moved that, Councillor Hamilton has seconded. Are there any questions about that? Is there anybody against? Councillor Wilson and Councillor Gadgel. I'm happy to speak briefly, but I don't think there's a huge amount that I want to say. Clearly, our current planning documents have this as a discretionary use, and it is quite likely that JDAP will make their decision based upon what our current planning documents say. However, I think that as a council, our responsibility is to advocate on behalf of our community. Clearly, we have had a lot of conversations with our state government representatives and our community about where our infill is required to go, and the feedback has consistently been around our train stations. So I think it would be remiss of us not to go to JDAP and present that position, whether or not it is going to be supported by the JDAP ultimately. As far as the location of the childcare centre next to a liquor store, I think there'd be many in our community who would be concerned about that mix of land uses. It's clearly not ideal, particularly given the issues at that particular site. We know that there's a police car often stationed in the car park of that liquor store because it is one of the problem areas in our community. So again, I think advocating for our community, it would be in our community's best interests for these two different land uses not to be located in close proximity. So our position going to the JDAP should be speaking on behalf of our community's best interests and not just saying what our planning documents are suggesting. Councillor Hamilton.
I've heard comments that more or less presuppose a JDAP decision. I think that's wrong. I think we should never presuppose a decision from another jurisdiction. I think we should always clearly state our position, and we have in the past entered into JDAP meetings with the expectation that we would lose and come out with successful arguments where we have, as a council, presented arguments that have been weighed up and considered valid. So I think that we should put forward our arguments to the JDAP. I also believe that the intent of our planning scheme is to update, and that is in the process. There are certainly some strong evidence that we are planning to put higher density closer to the train stations, and unless we put our argument forward, we are presupposing a decision from another authority, and I don't think that is a valid reason to simply step back and let this happen. I think we should at least put forward our arguments for a better outcome.
Councillor Wilson. Thank you, Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the limitations of our standing orders is that there's only discussion and debate on an item if someone's electing to speak against it. So that's the reason why I indicated my opposition, is to give us all an opportunity to put on public record and for the benefit possibly of the owners of the site to understand Council's thinking in relation to this application. I agree with all of the suggestions put forward by Her Worship and Councillor Hamilton. I do not feel that the current town planning scheme reflects the best and highest use of this land. I am firmly of the belief that the town would benefit from having a town in the north, and that I hope a future council would consider favourably the idea of having, say, 4 to 6 storey mixed commercial residential, not only on that site but on some of the adjacent blocks that are so close to the train station. Such an outcome would be consistent with the state government's approach, and I believe would be consistent with responsible planning and decision making. I agree that we shouldn't presuppose what the outcome of the JDAP meeting would be, and for that reason I will be voting for this motion. But I would encourage the owners of the lot to continue to have some patience with our town as we go through all of the necessary processes to get an amendment to our town planning scheme such that we'll realise ultimately greater value for the owner of the block, but also would realise the best and highest use of that land to provide density within walking distance of the train station and increased and improved amenity to our community.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Speaker for the motion. Against, Councillor Gadgell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I don't disagree with the points that have been made. However, we are looking at this as a planning matter. Certainly, one thing that has been raised with me through door knocking is the uncertainty that our planning situation has now caused people in our community. One gentleman in Ashfield, he's 70 years old. He purchased a block hoping that he'll be able to see the planning scheme through that was in review and to enable him to sell and develop the block to be developed for his retirement. Unfortunately, the house is in somewhat of a dire state, but it's there. He's purchased it as part of his, retirement, and of course, he asked me how far away could this new planning scheme be. He met with, at that stage, Mr. Tony Dowling, and things were progressing. Tonight, we're told that we're looking at potentially beyond 5 years for this town to have all the planning scheme.
Can I just think you're incorrect in saying that. You didn't say...
You said 2 to 3 years, and then it could take up to 5 for everything to be finalised.
No, 2 to 3 in total. So one of the first things I've asked the Director Community Planning, he will be doing as a priority, is a gap analysis, like how long is it going to take us to deliver a new strategy and scheme. So based on everything that's been done today, so I'm hoping that it's not starting at zero, but we've got some way there, and it's about what's the roadmap to complete it. So that will be a priority for him.
Okay, thank you. So you're saying tonight a maximum of 3 years, everything will be done, dusted.
That's, as a non-planner, that's the advice that I've received from my planning team.
Yep,
But
okay.
I would
Yep.
hope to be proven wrong, and it's less
Yes,
than that.
okay. Well, thank you. So, but in any case, it hasn't changed the situation where it was put on hold thereabouts 18 months ago, I think, or a year ago, I think you were saying earlier on tonight when you first arrived, and therefore it could then take up to 3 years still to come into place to finalise this planning scheme review. Therefore, I'm just raising those concerns. Again, I don't have any issues with the alternative recommendation. I mean, the other thing is as well, the people leave the block vacant whilst the town goes through this situation, because potentially they'll then be hit with differential ratings from the town. So obviously they may be concerned to make sure that they don't get penalised for waiting for the town to finalise their review in 3 years' time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that would like to speak? No? So just in closing then, thank you for everyone's points. I think we all acknowledge this is a very strategic site, that there's lots of potential for development north of the train line, particularly if we want to have our infill around our transport hubs. Our current strategy already shows that as having higher density, so there's a clear intent from the town there. And I'm sure everybody in this room is somewhat frustrated with the slow progress that has been made with the review of the our planning scheme and strategy. But the reality is that when we've gone and spoken to the WAPC, they have said that the process we're going through is a model one. They expect local governments to consult with their communities, and there's no way of speeding up that process. We're going through a process so that we can get as much of our community on board with getting the kind of outcomes that we all want to see, and unfortunately that takes time. I think it's important for us to state our position. Data can make the decision based upon hearing our position, hearing our staff's recommendation and forming their own opinion. But I think it's incumbent upon us to represent what it is that we know that our community wants, what we think the best outcomes for our town into the future will be. So I'd encourage you to vote to put forward this position to the GDAP. So all of those in favour of the alternative motion? Is that you hand up, Councillor Gandra?
Mm-hmm.
So that is carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Moving on now to, sorry, I've got my things in order. Item 10.4. This is the Community Benefit Sponsorship Grant application for Swan Districts Football Club. Thank you, Ian and Kerry.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here. No. Any questions on 10.4 for our staff? No, 10.4 isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. No questions? Okay, I believe there were some potential amendments that councillors would like to put forward. Councillor Hamilton?
Yes, I've got an amendment. Would you like me to read it
Yes,
out?
please.
Okay. That one, council receives the community benefit sponsorship and grants applications lodged by the Swan Districts Football Club to stage the Swans Camp Out event. 2, council approves funding in the amount of $2,000 to Swan Districts Football Club to stage the Swans Camp Out event, where said sponsorship is used for the following: A, provision of up to 70% rebate or discount, whichever word's appropriate, to residents of the town who register and are healthcare and or pensioner concession card holders, and B, provision of a 50% rebate to other residents of the town who register, and C, the above stated discounts be applied on a first to register basis until said sponsorship funds are exhausted, and D, these discounts be prominently displayed in all advertising and promotional material for the Swans Camp Out event, together with acknowledgement of the town's sponsorship. 3, the risk management plan is revised by the Swan Districts Football Club to ensure risks associated with the fire pit are managed appropriately. And 4, the event is free of single-use plastics, including balloons in line with the town's commitment to Council's resolution OCM 13318.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Can I just ask a question about Councillor Hamilton's alternative? I thought Jeff Dennis was going to be here, so that would have been great to be able to ask him, but unfortunately he's not. I support the sentiments that Councillor Hamilton is putting forward, but I'm just wondering if you have an indication about what impact that alternative may have on the events funding model and
Okay.
sorry, that's difficult for you.
That's fine. No, that's fine. I have had some conversations with Jeff. It will definitely have an impact, and without speaking directly for him, I suspect that it may have an impact as to whether they go ahead or not.
Councillor Hamilton?
Okay. Is it correct that the funding, the sponsorship money that the councils provided last year, was it last year?
Yeah.
Was used to give a 50% discount to the first 30...
Bassendean residents?
No, it wasn't even Bassendean residents, it was the first 30 bookings.
My understanding is that the council provided $3,000. That was the amount of the grant. This particular grant's $2,000, and the $1,000 difference is basically what was used to provide the rebate last year. So this year they've not asked for the same amount, but they're not able to provide the same provisions that they offered last year.
Okay, so let me just clarify that statement. What you're saying is that last year council supplied $3,000 sponsorship, which was supposed to be to give 50% discount to the first 30 families to book, but only $1,000 of that was used to give the discount, and the rest of the money, the $2,000, went towards their event. Is that what you're saying?
That would be my understanding. It wasn't put to me in that way, but that would be logically the way that you would look at it.
Okay.
So,
Councillor Gengel's got a question?
Yes, thank you. So, with this new process we've undertaken, can I just ask if the applicant was involved in any of the panel discussion with questions? Were they invited to do a deputation? Were they simply, because invited to the meeting is different to invited to doing a deputation to council? What is the
So Salvatore sent me a message today because I asked the same thing, and he said that they were invited to the meeting and explained the opportunity to give a deputation, and my expectation was that Jeff would be here this evening.
Yeah.
that's correct. They were both applicants were invited and invited to provide deputations as well. And
So
obviously they've elected not to.
So with the added layer of bureaucracy we've now put in place, so we now have some sort of panel process that it goes through before it then comes to council, so talk about red tape. Were our applicants invited to attend the panel session to actually address any concerns the town's panel may have?
The process was that the panel received the application, the panel convened and weren't satisfied with the level of information provided. So we went back and approached Swans District, and they provided an updated application. So they actually provided further information. We subsequently went back to them several more times to provide additional information. So at officer level, which is that part of the process, obviously it's 3 parts to the process, 3 levels. So at officer level, those conversations were had, and Swans were given more than 2-3 opportunities to provide additional information, and it was explained to them why that information was required.
And just before you ask a further question, my understanding is as well, like I know I've sent through some questions and you've had further communication based on those questions in the last few days, is that correct?
That's right.
So, just in relation to the other policy, so one of the things that potentially you could have done in the past is, if you had clarifications, just call the person and perhaps just seek clarification, but now canvassing of elected members. If prior to the determination of funding by council, an applicant or any agent canvasses any elected member of the town of Bassendean or attempts to provide additional information, either directly or indirectly, on any matter relating to the sponsorship or grant an elected member, the person/organisation may be disqualified and the sponsorship or grant excluded from being considered for approval. So that actually eliminates any councillor, any elected member seeking clarification from anybody with cooey of anything to do with an event or an organisation in the town such as this. Is that not detrimental to trying to get advice and clarification about what is acceptable for the applicant?
I'm happy to respond to that. So the new policy is really designed to preserve the role of council as the decision maker, so that the actual receipt of the application queries are taken by staff, and then the assessment is undertaken independently by officers, and then the information is then provided to council. On this occasion, the applicant was also provided an invitation to come and make a deputation, and we actually thought he would be here tonight, but so.
Can I just add something to that? Because I've had some conversations with our CEO about this as well, and that as this process evolves, it would be excellent if applicants came and had discussions through the process of developing their event rather than at this stage. So that's definitely something that I think would need to be looked at in future to get the best outcomes from this process.
Well, certainly. I mean, I am aware of, just in relation to canvassing of elected members, a situation that did occur where potentially somebody was texting an elected member during an item being discussed. Would that not be classified as canvassing of elected members?
Well, no, I think that was during our council meeting.
But that's not canvassing of elected members.
No. It's
during a council meeting where a decision's being made, that's not canvassing. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hamilton.
I have to say I actually concur with Councillor Gangel on that, but that's irrelevant in this particular argument. I want to go back to point before. Last year we provided $3,000 for 30 families, the first 30 families to register to get a 50% discount. Is that correct?
That's my understanding,
Right,
yes.
okay. So there was no limitation on those families being on concession cards or not. As far as my memory is, that was the first 30 families, and it didn't even apply to locals. So that's my recollection. So your response earlier indicates to me that only up to $1,000 of that grant money from last year was used in that 50% discount to those families, and that the other $2,000 went to the event.
I haven't seen any acquittal to actually provide that explanation.
Okay, that's a shame.
I have been told by the club that they were not able to offer the same arrangements this time, given that they're only asking for $2,000.
So, following on from that, if I changed my proposed amendment,
I think it's an alternative, Kath.
my alternative. If I changed that so that dot point C, so 2C, read the above stated rebates or discounts be applied on a first to register basis until said sponsorship funds, hang on, I'm trying to get it for the first 30 things so that, there will be...
So applied to the first 30 to register?
Yes. If we do that, then that leaves them another $1,000 for their event and $1,000 to go towards discounts.
Do you want to make it Bassendean residents?
Yes.
So you want to make point C, the above state rebates be applied to the first 30 town of Bassendean residents
to register. Yes.
Amy, how are you going? Yes, I do that. Thank you. Question?
Yeah, is that taking the provision of whether they're healthcare card holders or now you...
It applies to both.
But you're...
So Councillor Humphreys separated the discount that she is proposing for pension card and healthcare card holders and then just standard residents. Is that correct, Councillor Humphreys?
Yeah. But what I'm getting at is the first 30 to register may not all be concession card
That's
holders.
what I was asking.
Yeah, but it should apply to the first 30. Now, one would assume that that would use up about the same level of funding that was used last year, about $1,000, which would leave them another $1,000 for their event.
So, but just before we answer, excuse me, our CEO just had a point that she would like to raise so that we understand what's being proposed.
So there's also an intricate funding model and a relationship between Swan Districts Football Club and the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries, and it only became apparent to me over dinner. And I've just asked Mona if she would explain that.
So I was advised that the way that the rebate was accessed was via application to the department, and that that's how the rebate was processed, and that it was 50%. So the club doesn't enter into that process directly.
How does the department get involved in this? It just seems, I know you can't really answer that, it seems.
And it's concession card holders, but also there are also provisions. He's also explained to me that they're prepared to look at people who are having significant financial hardship, and then offer them the same rebate even if they don't have a healthcare card.
Okay. So, what a process. It seems that we have departed from the original intent of last year's provision of sponsorship quite dramatically, and that I find concerning. But moving on, apart from that, is there any restriction for the town, given that we as a town are using ratepayers' money to provide the sponsorship, which is not a problem, but I would like the discounts to apply to people who are living in the town. Now, is that a problem in any...
Councillor, my memory is that last year was the first 30 town of Bassendean residents. No?
That's not what happened.
But that was our...
intent, but that's not what
That was
happened.
our resolution, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any further questions? You had your hand up? Yes?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just having a look at the budget for the project, I noticed that some line items may in fact be able to be accommodated in kind, particularly the provision there for $200 for waste removal, $200 for promotions. I'm just wondering if there's any scope for the town to use its considerable reach through the town's social media to provide promotion to the event to reduce some of the other external costs associated.
Absolutely, that would be something that we would consider, provided the club was happy to accept that.
Just one further question. So as the mover of the original motion from last year, staff's implementation of Council's resolution was the subject of discussion in a number of forums, including the mid-year budget review. It's not really a question. We would just like to impress upon the administration the desirability of implementing Council's resolutions as they're passed, rather than in a creative way.
Did you have further question, Councillor Hamilton?
Yes, because... okay. Having heard about a process now which was completely unfamiliar and not my understanding of how the process was to be implemented last year, I note your dot point 3 in the revised officer's recommendation says that Swan Districts Football Club offers a 50% rebate to concession card holders and families who do not have a concession card but are experiencing significant... How does that work, given the previous statement that these concessions are not provided through Swans, but in fact provided through the department of whoever?
Sorry, Bonnie, you can...
That's okay. That's okay. I'm assuming that they would be processing that directly themselves. So not through the rebate.
Okay, so just run me through this. A rebate, so do these people who are going to the camp out have to apply, pay the full price, and then wait for a rebate to be sent back to them?
To be honest, I don't know the exact mechanics. When I asked the question, the information that came back to me from the club was that the application is online directly to the department to obtain the rebate. However, if people were experiencing hardship and didn't have a healthcare card, that the club would still provide them with that rebate. So clearly, if they don't have a healthcare card, they'll not be able to apply directly. So
I think my point is
they would
more-
have to be done separately at club level, I guess.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
I understand you're giving me as much information as you know. I guess my concern here is that if it's $110 for a parent and a child, and if residents or anybody has to come up with that up front and then get a 50% rebate later on down the track, it really does limit the number of people who can take advantage of this. People who are financially in difficulty or who are somewhat poorer than most will not have that money up front. So I'm quite concerned about this process and how we can apply a process, because the whole idea of this camp out was to be inclusive.
Can we, Councillor Hamilton, it seems like the discussion at the moment is around the word rebate and discount and the process that
Discount.
would involve. Would we be able to potentially reword your alternative so that it gives the intention that we want the cost to be at 70% for people who are pension card holders and whatever,
Yes.
and the cost for the first however many residents to be 50% if they're not financially disadvantaged, and leave the mechanics of whether it's a rebate or a discount to them to sort out at this point in time, because we don't have full understanding of that, and it will still achieve your purpose. Yes, Councillor Gagnon?
Sorry, just when we first started this discussion, I don't know why to say Solomon. Sorry, Miss Solomon. I didn't want to call you by your first name. I didn't want. Miss Solomon. Miss Solomon mentioned that the amendment, the feedback she had been given, is that that's the difference between whether or not the event potentially does go ahead and doesn't go ahead. So that's what I'm concerned about.
Okay. Question?
Of the mover of the alternative.
Okay. Can we let? Have you got an alternative wording or?
Yes.
Okay.
Just wondering if the Councillor Hamilton would consider wording that says that the town would pay 70% of the fees
For the first 30 families.
and 70% and 50% as applicable, but the town pays 70% and 50% for those two categories for the first 30 families, and the balance or any unallocated funds would then go towards the general expenses for the event. That's the
Tom.
intention.
So Amy, how are you going over there?
So we're changing all of those, point A,
Councillor Wilson, did you have it?
Jo-
A, B and
So
A,
the
B.
town funds 70% of the cost to.
Yes.
town would pay 70% and 50%
Well, for the first 30
for the first 30
residents
families.
of the town of Bassendean who register, the town would pay either 70% of the costs for healthcare card and concession holders, or 50% of the cost for other residents.
Which means that point C becomes redundant and comes out
Yes.
because you're including it in the top part of point 2. You got that, Amy?
Not really, no.
Okay.
Yeah, this is coming out, yeah.
Question? Or
No,
you just wanting to move on?
No, I'm happy to move the officer recommendation.
Okay, start on that.
We
seconder, yeah.
List the town of Bassendean families.
That's the difference between it's whether or not the event goes in or not. I think if we give them cash and then they put it in scheme. But this is the problem. This is the problem. When you make amendments to officer recommendations where they don't know what the following effect is.
Yes.
Did you say provision or receives a 70% refund?
No, the town would pay 70% of the registration fee. So,
Oh.
Can I ask you all to just take your seats again? Sorry. So our CEO has just raised some concerns, not with the So our CEO has just raised some concerns, not with the intention of what we're trying to achieve here, but with the mechanism by which it might be being approached, and that we may be jeopardising the rebates that Swan districts would be eligible for if we word it so specifically that we're dictating how the funding is allocated. So there's been a suggestion that, do you all have this sheet, which was the...
Again, I'm happy to move the officer recommendation.
Hold on, Councillor Gage. We've already got a mover and a seconder for this one. So so have you all got this one, which was the alternative that the staff put forward? So to achieve what you're trying to say, Councillor Hamilton, the suggestion was that point 3 on that sheet, which currently says Swan Districts Football Club offers 30% rebate to concession card holders and families who have blah, 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 and changing that to saying the Swan Districts Football Club utilises the $2,000 from Town of Bassendean contribution towards Town of Bassendean families. And then we could add in if we wanted experiencing significant financial hardship.
I'd be much more comfortable with that because it's some sort of intent of helping people that are disadvantaged, not people who can access it in a hurry.
Sorry.
Anyway, I'll vote accordingly.
Yeah. I just think that 50% is not enough for concession card holders.
Okay. All right. So have you got the wording of the motion that you want to? No. Okay. Can we get that wording, and then Councillor Ganjo has indicated he then wants to move the officer recommendation if that doesn't get up, and then I think Councillor Mikachuk has another version that she would like to propose. So maybe you can think about exactly what you want to propose.
No, I'm happy with what you just suggested.
Okay. Councillor Hamilton.
I don't believe this process is a good one that we're going through right now.
Councillor Hamilton.
After you.
As the voice of reason.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a further question to the mover of the alternative item. If we were to keep points 1 and 2 of the officer recommendation in place and alter item 3 to say that the Swan Districts Club offers a 70% discount rather than rebate to concession card holders.
Fine.
Yes. With that, who are residents of the town rather than elsewhere.
So I think the only issue is Swan Districts would need to cap it at a certain amount, or they
First 30 families.
Yeah.
Yes.
So perhaps Swans can implement that based on their...
Can I just query that, because the current officer recommendation doesn't cap that?
I think the Swans would need to, otherwise they might run at a significant loss.
All right, so Councillor Hamilton, are you happy with the seconder's changes to your motion? Amy, are you happy that you've got it recorded? If so, would you mind reading out what you have?
Wasn't that changed just to the alternative officer recommendation? Point 3?
Just so that everyone's clear, would you mind reading it out?
No, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear completely lost.
Sorry,
I think you're excused.
was it the case, Councillor Hamilton, that point 3 would now read of the officer recommendation that the Swan District's Football Club offers a 70% discount instead of rebate to the first 30 Town of Bassendean concession card holders who register?
So we still don't have the cap then?
The first 30.
Okay.
To change that to 2,100.
So in point 2, as you just pointed out, that would now to increase to 2,100, so that if the 30 took that up, they have sufficient funds.
These changes are to the alternative officer recommendation.
No, sorry,
it's
to
the
the
one
substantive officer recommendation.
The initial officer recommendation. Okay, sorry. Okay, so point 2, we're now changing to 2,100.
Yes. And the 50% changes to 70% and the word rebate changes to discount.
Discount. 2. To the first. 30.
You can move that.
You've already moved it. He's seconded
Ah.
it. Does anybody need that to be read out, or are you all comfortable with what's being proposed?
Well, point 1 and 2 are the same.
Yep.
So point 3 is the only one that's changed.
So Amy, maybe you can read point 3 for us.
Point 2's changed to 2,100.
Yeah, that's correct.
And point 3 now reads, the Swan District's Football Club offers a 70% discount to the first 30 concession card holders who are Town of Bassendean residents.
Who register?
Okay, is everybody happy?
And then we've got 4 and 5 are the same.
4 and 5.
Yeah.
And this is the original officer recommendation.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so Councillor Hamilton has moved, Councillor Wilson has seconded. Is there anybody against? Councillor Gangel, Councillor Hamilton, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you to the staff for trying to unravel some of the details of this. There's been a few revelations tonight. Certainly, I was unaware of how some of these processes were implemented last year. Being more aware now makes me more concerned than ever that we try and benefit our ratepayers, because any income that we have in this town comes from our ratepayers. It doesn't come from anywhere else. So therefore, our ratepayers should be the first to benefit from any sponsorships. And I'm particularly aware that we have a number of people in the town who are doing it tough. So I would like to see that benefit directed towards those people most. Certainly, the Fathering Project, which is where this idea originally came from, was an exceptionally grand idea that was embraced by the town. And thank you to Councillor Wilson for bringing it to our attention, because without that we would never have done this project last year. I would hope that we can find common ground with Swan Districts so that the project will proceed. But I also am aware that ratepayers' money should be of benefit to our local population. So in that instance, I have no hesitation in putting forward this amendment where we try and benefit our local residents first.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm delighted to second this motion and agree with all the sentiments put forward by Councillor Hamilton. Unamended, the officer recommendation would result in a situation where people would have to find the funds up front and be able to pay those funds up front to possibly be rebated at some point in the future. I think that would be an obstacle to some people being able to participate, because they would have to have those funds available in order to register for a rebate. So for that reason, I support the change of the word rebate to discount. I also agree with Councillor Hamilton that it would be problematic for us to use our neighbours' rates to discount people from Kalamunda, or people from High Wycombe, or people from Forestfield, or people from any of the other locations that would attend this event. And I would encourage the City of Swan and other relevant local governments to also provide their own discounts for people to participate in this sort of process. But I think it is appropriate that we limit the discount that we provide to our neighbours and their families. Thirdly, I think the benefit of the change to the words means that we would provide the funding up front to the organisers of the event. They would be able to utilise the balance of any of those funds not claimed or discounts not provided to defray any of the other event costs, and for that reason I would encourage all councillors to support the amended motion.
Thank you, Councillor Gadget.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, who would have thought for a relatively small grant we'd spend a very long time discussing it. I have said, and I continue to say, I believe the policy that the Council has implemented is deeply flawed. Consistently, every item that comes back with this new policy is a mess. I have not seen one application since this policy has been implemented that has been smooth, that has been able to be adopted by Council without a lot of frantic discussion and guesswork. And that's what's happened again tonight. It's a lot of guesswork. We can't contact the person directly because that would be considered canvassing by elected members, so we can't seek clarification and do our due diligence ourselves because we've passed a policy that prohibits that, and therefore would actually wipe this process off. Also, I am concerned that with Council making amendments to recommendations, we don't know the domino and flow-on effect. Council did move a motion that basically allowed for infrastructure and marketing for an event, but not entertainment of the event, which has caused some problematic situations. So we're not aware of the domino effect that potentially can be created. That's why I'm a bit hesitant to support the change that's been proposed. Personally, I think it's fantastic to have other people from other jurisdictions coming in to our town and experiencing the great beauty of our town, of the Oval, and obviously of our town centre as well, and river and the like. Preferably, it will be for the benefit of our community, but I'm certainly somebody who encourages a wide population from outside our community to come in and experience the greatness and the wonder that is our wonderful community, and certainly don't have an issue with the subsequent funds being used for the event itself, because I think the event is a very, very worthy event indeed. But I'm a bit cautious about not really knowing what the effects are when we were told when we started discussing this that potentially the amendment or any amendment that was suggested could be the difference between the event going ahead and not going ahead. So that's the reason why I'll be voting against. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone would like to speak for the motion? I'd just like to speak quickly. I think Swan Districts is doing a great job of trying to build community and greater connections within our town, which is fantastic. And this project, as Councillor suggested, the Fathering Project, which is where it's initiated, is a fantastic one that I think everybody in this room supports. I think it's unfortunate that cost becomes a factor that limits people from participating in this project, and I think ultimately that's really what this discussion has been about tonight, is removing the barriers for members of our community to be able to participate. I don't agree with Councillor Gangel's comments about the policy and so on being a mess. I think this is only a very new policy. We're still in the transition phase, and inevitably there's going to be some teething issues where things are getting worked out, but I have faith that our staff are going to take on board the comments that they're hearing from councillors and the feedback, and that future iterations will evolve and be much more smooth in the future. I think the conversation tonight's been really important because it identifies some of the principles that councillors want to be taken into consideration when the staff are assessing future grant applications. So I in no way think it's been a waste of time having this conversation tonight. But I agree that the money that is going to sponsorship should be benefiting our ratepayers. They've contributed money, in this instance, to Swan District's, to the Bassendean Oval, and now contributing again through this grant, so they should be able to attend this event. So my preference would be for all Town of Bassendean ratepayers to get a discount, not just the concession card holders, but this is a better outcome than what otherwise would have been presented. And I'm grateful to the staff for trying to work through this, and hopefully next year there will be even more clarity around how this event can work in the best interests for our community. So thank you. Councillor Hamilton, did you want to speak again?
Again, I'd like to express my thanks to the staff for guiding us through what has been a little bit of a tangled web tonight. But I agree with Mayor McLennan that this conversation, although it's been drawn out, has highlighted what is important to us, and that is a benefit direct to our residents and to our most needy residents. And this project, the Fathering Project, is something which could benefit those in our society who are most in need. And so I am very keen on making sure that any sponsorship that we provide is aimed at those people who would get the greatest use and benefit from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Okay, so we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Wilson, Hamilton and McLennan, and against Councillor Gangel and Brown. Councillor Mikachuk, did you vote?
Yeah, in favour.
For? Oh, so just again, Councillor Wilson, Mikachuk, Hamilton and McLennan for, and against is Councillor Gangel and Brown, and that is carried. Item 10.5, thank you for bearing with that one, Amy, is the consideration of the council meetings and briefing sessions and citizenship ceremonies for 2020. Were there questions, Councillor Gangel?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Now, last week I did ask a series of questions in relation to the briefing sessions that we're going to go out into the community with, and I note there's been no follow-up in the agenda in relation to my questions, so I did my own research to follow up, because Council did in fact, I was just cleaning up my drawer just in case on Saturday night. So, Council did in fact, so here we are, guidelines for Council briefing sessions.
Which we rescinded recently.
I don't think we rescinded them, Your Worship.
Yes, we did.
Did we rescind them?
Yes.
When did we rescind them?
In August.
This year?
Yes, yes.
What did we rescind them with?
Just rescinded the briefing session guidelines attached to the OCM agenda of the 19th of December 2017. So when the electoral caretaker period policy was considered and the review of the committee structure, that was an added...
So then what is the guidelines then that you use to produce this, not this document, this is the council meeting, but the document for the briefing session? What is the guidelines then with question time and the like? If that was rescinded, what is the guidelines we're using for conducting briefing sessions?
So for the last briefing session, we had the provision available for under Section 5, addressed by members of the public.
Yes.
Also,
but sorry, Madam CEO, you're saying Council has rescinded, so we have no guidelines at all for how we conduct briefing sessions. Is that what you're saying? So it's pick as you choose.
No, we've got a template which we've been basing it on, and we're currently looking at that. We've got officers that are reviewing other councils' briefing sessions. So for the upcoming briefing sessions in the community, I have a meeting scheduled with officers tomorrow to talk about alternate approaches, and then we have a concept workshop coming up in early November prior to going to the community to discuss that with the new council. Okay, because the last known briefing session guidelines that the council adopted, I didn't realise that we had revoked, and we're running now on Rafferty's
more with briefing sessions, because the last 9 ones. This is why I'm just wondering, when we're going out to the community with a fixed agenda, I'm quite happy to go to the community and actually have a bit like meeting of electors, where it's, they can ask what they want, and we can answer, rather than going with our agenda and then having to do our meeting. But the last 9 one, and the reason why I asked, I'm just wondering how it's going to be conducted, because the last one that this council adopted actually removed question time. And the other thing that the reason why that they removed question time was also to allow for inspections to take place if needed, was one of the reasonings as well. So are inspections no longer going to be taking place? Is that going to be gone as part of this new proposal with briefings?
Inspections can still occur, but the idea is that we will bring a proposal for discussion with the councillors at a concept workshop on how the briefing sessions could run, and there's some alternate models around that allow for participation of the community, but also importantly for councillors to be briefed ahead of an OCM. So at the moment in our briefing session agenda, we have section 5, addressed by members of the public.
Yes.
Now that is, I think, normally for statements to be made, but often members of the public also ask questions as well. So I guess that will be one of the discussion points to raise at the concept workshop. How would we like to see that occur?
Yeah, because the other one that under the known policy, the last known policy, now that I didn't realise we had Rafferty rules, the last known policy actually had that when you made deputation, they had to be on the agenda item. So we're heading out in November to do briefing sessions in the community with no guidelines, no understanding of how the meetings will be conducted, no...
I think Haseo has said that there's... Mm-hmm. The plan is to have a discussion with the incoming council so that everybody has an understanding, and that can be clarified at that point so that. But
this is a decision that's been made by this council, not the incoming council. That's why I'm asking for the incoming council, with us not even knowing the direction, but we're going to wait until the incoming council comes in, and then, but we won't actually have guidelines in place for the briefing session. I'm taking.
We can develop guidelines ahead of the briefing session, but I think it's important as part of the new council's orientation that we not only talk about briefing sessions, but also the legal framework, the state planning framework. There's a raft of things that need to be covered, and yes, we need to talk about the community briefing sessions and how they look. So that will be part of that orientation period, and it's scheduled into a concept workshop for discussion, and there'll be a discussion paper ahead of the concept workshop.
Wilson.
Thank you, Worship. Further to Councillor Gangel's questions and your response, will that paper also include a communications plan for Council's information?
Yes, Councillor Gangel, your comments from our last meeting have been passed on to officers in terms of considering the different, I don't want to say the different players, but considering councillors' role, officers' role, and also the community's role, to make sure ahead of time everyone's aware of what the rules of engagement look like, and the purpose of the briefing session. So there will be some outline information guide in that regard to help people.
Wonderful, thank you. And just on the opportunity that our community has to come and give deputations, there'll be specific information educating our community about their ability to come and provide deputations amongst that?
Yes. Councillor Hamilton.
Given November will be the first time this happens, will there be any provisions made for those people who perhaps don't read the update that's going to be down at Ashfield, etc., so forth and so on? In other words,
a sign on the door.
People who rock up. I'm hoping that the administration will have some contingency plan for that.
So post caretaker period, there'll be a significant promotions campaign to advise the community that we will be visiting their area, and so we'll make sure that that's on the website, Town of Bassendean, Facebook, etc. We'll also have signage and customer service here directing people. So our first meeting is scheduled for the Ashfield Senior Centre and a community barbecue ahead of time.
Okay. And can that signage be up for like the 4-week proceeding so that people become familiar with it? I do have another question regarding this item. We did speak briefly during the briefing last week about some of the dates for the OCMs that have public holidays. Now, I'm assuming that I don't need to move any sort of formal amendment to make sure that the administration distribute the agenda and the attachments not only to councillors well in advance, but also to have it online in advance of the public holiday weekends.
Certainly. I did actually go back and check the public holidays and also how they line up with the public holidays in April and then the Queen's birthday on the 28th of September. So the briefing sessions are ahead of both of the public holidays. So councillors will already have the full agenda, and so it'll just be any follow-up items. The public holiday
the
falls,
OCMs.
Yes.
Yep.
Falls
Okay.
into-
The reason I bring this up is the late addition of items
Yes.
to OCM agendas, which precludes the ability for instance, item 10.2 tonight we only received on Friday evening, which for me creates problems. Now, if you can imagine that there was a public holiday, there'd be absolutely no ability to engage with the administration to get answers. So, bearing in mind that we have had late items attached to our agendas, I'm well aware that public holidays can limit the amount of information that councillors can get.
So perhaps for those two dates in April and September, the OCMs, we provide however many public holidays. I think in April there are the two, Friday, Monday.
So
We
2 days.
provide the agenda, the OCM agenda and the papers 2 days ahead of normal delivery date, and in September 1 day ahead of
Yep.
normal delivery date.
That's what I was hoping for. Thank you.
All right, if everyone's happy, do we have a mover for the Officer recommendation? Oh, you have a question, Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, sorry, Your Worship, just one last question. Just seeking clarification around how staff imagined the recording and the
Briefing session?
publication of the recording of the briefing session would operate given the different locations.
Because of the different venues, what we thought we'd do is bring in somebody to actually set it up to start with, just to, obviously we'll be moving around, so trying to lug our equipment may not always be fit for purpose. So having somebody that can set that up and test it beforehand as part of the trial is something that we're looking at.
What's the cost?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
May I ask if staff will be perhaps trained by this person to actually follow suit in subsequent meetings so that they can set up the equipment themselves?
Yes. So I have actually asked about that, about the cost of leasing versus purchasing and what our role would be, what the contractor's role will be. So exactly, yeah. So I have a meeting about that tomorrow.
Okay.
I'd be happy with that option too. Okay, do we now have a mover for the Officer recommendation? Okay, I will move it. Is there a seconder? Councillor Mitchell, is there anybody against? All those in favour? Carried unanimously with a lot of enthusiasm. 10.6, the CEO's 12-month highlight report. And before we discuss that, Peter, I have something to give to you from our staff. So lovely Deanie has gone around and got all of your staff to sign up. Thank you for first 12 months card. So thank you and well done for all your efforts over the first year.
Thank you
Very much
I'm not going
appreciated.
to open it. Thank you.
But I think as everyone can see from the report, there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and we still don't have our full complement of the new executive team, so thank you for what you've done to keep the ship afloat during that period where we've been a bit down in the last few months. So much appreciated. Questions?
Thank you, Your Worship. My question relates to page 40 of the agenda item, to third paragraph down, starting with on 21 October 2019. And the officer report goes on to outline that the new executive team for the town will be fully established by the 21st of October. My question to the CEO is, are you as happy about this development as I am?
I think this is deja vu from last week, Councillor Wilson.
Well, it's actually it's quite bizarre in that we'll have not only a new executive team, new leadership team, but also a new council as well. So I'm very much looking forward to it, and in terms of taking the organisation forward with the new leadership team, new council.
Any other questions? Okay, do we have a mover for the officer recommendation? Moved Councillor McKittrick, seconded Councillor Wilson. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. So I think that's it for the items up until item 11. So I don't think there's any motions councillors are giving notice of. There's no announcements for the next meeting, I'm assuming. In that case, we move to item 13, which is confidential business. So do I have a mover to go behind closed doors? No.
Thank you.
So Councillor Wilson moved, Councillor McKittrick seconded. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously.